The dust devils danced across the cracked earth like ghosts mocking Theresa Fairchild's desperation. And she knew with absolute certainty that, unless a miracle arrived within the week, she would lose everything her husband had died trying to protect. The year was 1883, and the drought had strangled western Texas for 3 consecutive summers, turning once fertile land into a wasteland of broken dreams and abandoned homesteads. Theresa stood on what remained of her porch, her calloused hands gripping the weathered railing as she surveyed the desolation that had once been a thriving farm. The cotton fields that had sustained her family for nearly a decade now lay barren, the soil so dry it crumbled to powder at the slightest touch. Her small herd of cattle had dwindled from 20 head to just 5 skeletal animals that barely had the strength to stand. She was 26 years old, though the harsh sun and harder circumstances had etched lines around her green eyes that made her appear older. Her auburn hair, once lustrous and carefully maintained, now hung in a simple braid down her back, streaked with dust that no amount of washing could fully remove. The black mourning dress she had worn faithfully for the first year after Robert's death had long since been replaced by practical homespun skirts and faded cotton blouses, the kind that could withstand the endless labor of trying to keep a dying farm alive. Robert had been gone for 2 years now, taken by a fever that swept through their small community just outside El Dorado, Texas. He had been a good man, steady and reliable, though their marriage had been more of a practical arrangement than a passionate romance. At 19, she had been the daughter of a struggling shopkeeper, and Robert, at 25, had needed a wife to help run his inherited property. They had grown fond of each other in the way 2 people yoked together by circumstance often do. But Theresa had never known the kind of love she had read about in the few precious books her mother had owned. Now she faced a different kind of challenge entirely. The bank in El Dorado had given her until the end of September to make good on the loan Robert had taken out to expand the farm just before his death. She had exactly $47 to her name and owed $300. Without water, without crops, without any prospect of income, she knew the mathematics of her situation added up to only one outcome. Theresa walked across her property, her boots crunching on the brittle grass. The well that had served them faithfully for years had run completely dry in July. Now she had to haul every precious drop of water from the creek nearly a mile away, and even that had diminished to little more than a trickle. She made the journey twice daily, her shoulders aching from the weight of the buckets, conserving every ounce for drinking and cooking. The animals got what little remained, though it was never enough. As she approached the fence line that separated her property from the neighboring ranch, she noticed something that made her stop in her tracks. The grass on the other side, while not lush, showed definite signs of green. The cattle that grazed there looked healthy, their coats glossy in the afternoon sun. She had met her neighbor only a handful of times in the years she had lived here. Robert had mentioned him occasionally, a man who kept to himself and ran his ranch with quiet efficiency. Thomas Whitmore was that neighbor's name, and Theresa knew little else about him, except that he had arrived in Texas some 5 years ago and had built his ranch from nothing into one of the more prosperous operations in the county. He was younger than Robert had been, perhaps close to her own age, and the few times their paths had crossed, he had tipped his hat politely but kept his distance. Widows and unmarried men did not socialize without inviting gossip, and both of them seemed to understand that unspoken rule. But now, staring at the relative health of his land, Theresa felt a surge of desperate curiosity. How was he managing when everyone else was failing? What source of water sustained his ranch when all the wells in the area had gone dry? The sound of hoofbeats interrupted her thoughts. She looked up to see a rider approaching from the direction of the Whitmore ranch, and as the figure drew closer, she recognized Thomas himself. He sat tall in the saddle, his broad-shouldered frame moving with the easy grace of someone who had spent more of his life on horseback than on foot. He wore dusty work clothes and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face, but as he drew near and removed it in greeting, she could see his features clearly for the first time in months. He had a strong, honest face, weathered by sun and wind but still young, with blue eyes that held both intelligence and something else she could not quite name. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at his collar, and a few days' worth of stubble covered his jaw. There was nothing refined about him, but there was an undeniable presence, a quiet strength that seemed to radiate from him. "Mrs. Fairchild," he said, his voice deep and respectful. "I hope I am not intruding." "Mr. Whitmore," she replied, conscious of how she must look, dusty and worn from her morning labors. "What brings you to this part of your property?" He dismounted in one fluid motion, holding his hat in his hands. Up close, she could see he was perhaps 28 or 29, his eyes level with hers as she stood on slightly higher ground. "I have been meaning to ride over for some time now," he said carefully. "I could not help but notice that your well has run dry." Theresa felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. It was one thing to struggle in private, quite another to have a neighbor acknowledge her failing circumstances. "I manage well enough," she said, lifting her chin. "The creek still runs." "Barely," Thomas said gently. "And it is a long walk to carry water. I wanted to offer you access to my well. I drilled deep last year, hit an underground spring. There is more than enough for both our properties." She stared at him, certain she had misheard. "I do not understand. You are offering me water?" "Yes, madam." "Free access, as much as you need for your household and your animals." He met her eyes steadily. "I know what pride feels like, Mrs. Fairchild, and I know this might be hard to accept, but the way I see it, we are neighbors. That ought to mean something, especially in hard times." Theresa felt a lump forming in her throat. It had been so long since anyone had offered her kindness without expecting something in return. "Mr. Whitmore, I cannot possibly accept such generosity without offering some kind of payment or trade." "I am not asking for anything in return," he said firmly. "But if it makes you feel better, perhaps you could help me with something I have been struggling with." "What is that?" A faint smile crossed his face, transforming his serious expression into something warmer. "My cooking is terrible. Truly awful. If you would be willing to share a meal now and then, perhaps teach me a few things about making food that does not taste like boot leather, I would consider us more than even." Despite everything, despite the weight of her worries and the crushing burden of her circumstances, Theresa found herself smiling. "That seems hardly a fair trade, Mr. Whitmore." "Then we disagree on fair value," he replied. "Do we have an arrangement?" She hesitated only a moment longer before extending her hand. "We do, and thank you. You cannot know what this means." His hand engulfed hers, warm and calloused from hard work. The handshake lasted only a moment, but Theresa felt an unexpected jolt at the contact, something that made her pull away perhaps too quickly. If Thomas noticed, he gave no sign. "I will ride back to my place and bring over a wagon with some barrels," he said, settling his hat back on his head. "You can fill them and have water on your property. I will bring fresh barrels every few days until we figure out a better system." "That is too much trouble," Theresa protested. "It is no trouble at all," Thomas assured her. "I make the trip to town regularly anyway. Your place is hardly out of my way." Before she could argue further, he had mounted his horse and was riding back toward his ranch, leaving Theresa standing at the fence line, her mind reeling with this unexpected turn of events. She had been so prepared for loss, so certain that her isolation and struggle would end only in defeat, that this simple act of neighborly kindness felt almost miraculous. True to his word, Thomas returned within 2 hours, driving a wagon loaded with 6 large wooden barrels. Theresa had tidied herself as best she could, changing into a less dusty blouse and attempting to tame her hair into something presentable. She told herself it was simple courtesy, not vanity, but she could not quite silence the small voice that whispered otherwise. Thomas worked efficiently, positioning the barrels near her porch where they would be easy to access. He moved with the economy of motion that came from years of physical labor, and Theresa found herself noticing details she had no business noticing. The way his shoulders strained against his shirt when he lifted the heavy barrels. The concentration on his face as he made sure each one was perfectly positioned. The unexpected gentleness in his hands as he demonstrated how the spigots worked. "These should last you a good while," he said, straightening up and wiping his brow with his sleeve. "When they run low, just raise that red cloth on your fence post, and I will know to bring more." "You have thought of everything," Theresa said softly. "I have had some practice at solving problems," Thomas replied. He glanced at the sky, where the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon. "I should be heading back. I have animals to tend." "Mr. Whitmore," Theresa said quickly, before she could lose her nerve. "Would you stay for supper? It is the least I can do, and I believe we had an arrangement about meals." He looked surprised, then pleased. "I would like that very much, Mrs. Fairchild, thank you." Theresa's kitchen was modest but well organized, the domain where she felt most competent and in control. She had precious little to work with, but she was a skilled cook who could make much from little. She prepared a simple meal of beans seasoned with the last of her salt pork, cornbread made from carefully hoarded cornmeal, and stewed tomatoes from the jars she had put up the previous summer when times had been better. Thomas sat at her small table, his large frame making the furniture seem almost delicate. He watched her move around the kitchen with open appreciation. "It has been a long time since I have seen someone cook with such confidence," he said. "My mother used to move around the kitchen just like that, like she knew exactly where everything was without looking." "Where is your mother now?" Theresa asked, stirring the beans. "She passed when I was 16, Thomas said quietly. "Fever took her, same as it took my father and my younger sister. I was the only one who survived." Theresa turned to look at him, seeing the old grief in his eyes. "I am so sorry. That must have been unbearable." "It was a long time ago," he said, though the pain in his voice suggested otherwise. "I drifted for a while after that, worked on various ranches, saved my money. Eventually made my way to Texas and decided to put down roots. Figured my family would have wanted me to build something lasting." "They would be proud of what you have accomplished," Theresa said, setting the food on the table. "Your ranch is one of the finest in the county." "It keeps me busy," Thomas allowed. He waited politely until she had seated herself before taking his first bite. The expression that crossed his face made Theresa laugh despite herself. "That good?" she asked. "Mrs. Fairchild, I was not exaggerating about my cooking," he said seriously. "This is genuinely the best meal I have had in months, maybe years." They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the kind that suggested an ease between them that should not have been possible given how little they knew each other. But somehow, sitting across the table from Thomas felt natural, as though they had shared many such meals before. "Tell me," Thomas said eventually, "what are your plans for the farm?" Theresa set down her fork, the question hitting too close to the worry that never left her mind. "Honestly, I do not know if I have any plans left. The bank expects payment by the end of September. I have no crops to sell, no way to raise the money I need. Your generosity with the water helps immensely, but I fear it may be too late to save anything." "How much do you owe?" Thomas asked bluntly. $300, Theresa said, the sum feeling impossibly large. "I have been trying to figure out how to earn it, but there is no work to be had in El Dorado. Everyone is struggling just as much as I am." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "What if we worked together, combined our efforts?" Theresa looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "I have water and healthy pasture. You have land that could recover with proper irrigation and time. More importantly, you have skills I lack. I have been thinking about expanding, maybe adding chickens, a larger vegetable garden, preserving more food for winter. But I do not have the knowledge or the time to manage all of that myself." He leaned forward, his blue eyes intense. "What if you ran those operations on my property? I could pay you a fair wage and you could use your land for grazing my cattle. We could work out a percentage share of any profits." "Mr. Whitmore, that is incredibly generous, but—" "It is not generosity," Thomas interrupted gently. "It is good business. I need help and you need income. We would both benefit from the arrangement, and please call me Thomas. I think we are going to be spending enough time together that formality seems a bit ridiculous." "Only if you call me Theresa," she replied, feeling a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with business arrangements. "Theresa," he repeated, and the way he said her name with such care and warmth made that flutter intensify. "What do you say? Will you consider it?" She should have been more cautious. Should have thought through all the implications, considered what the townspeople might say about a widow and a bachelor working so closely together. But looking into Thomas's honest face, seeing the genuine desire to help her combined with a practical business proposition, Theresa found herself nodding. "Yes," she said, "I will consider it. In fact, I accept." Thomas's smile transformed his entire face, and Theresa realized with a start that he was actually quite handsome when he smiled like that, open and genuine and pleased. "Excellent. We can start whenever you are ready. Tomorrow, if you like." "Tomorrow," Theresa agreed, feeling hope kindle in her chest for the first time in months. They talked well into the evening, discussing plans and possibilities. Thomas told her about his ranch, about the herd of cattle he was building, about his dreams of creating something sustainable and lasting. Theresa shared her knowledge of farming, of the rhythms of planting and harvesting, of the careful work of preserving food and managing a household. They discovered they worked well together in conversation, building on each other's ideas, finding solutions to problems through collaboration. When Thomas finally rose to leave, the stars were thick in the sky above them. He stood on her porch, hat in hand, looking at her with an expression she could not quite read in the darkness. "Thank you for the meal," he said, "and for agreeing to this partnership. I think we are going to do good work together, Theresa." "I think so too, Thomas," she replied, and felt a shiver run through her that had nothing to do with the cooling night air. She watched him ride away, his silhouette disappearing into the darkness, and wondered what she had just set in motion. This was supposed to be a business arrangement, a practical solution to mutual problems. But the warmth in her chest and the way her name had sounded in his voice suggested it might become something more complicated than that. The next morning, Theresa woke before dawn, as was her habit. But instead of the heavy dread that usually accompanied her waking, she felt a spark of anticipation. She dressed carefully in her sturdiest work clothes, braided her hair tightly, and prepared a simple breakfast. As the sun began to paint the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold, she saw Thomas riding toward her property, leading a second horse. "I thought you might need a mount," he called out as he approached. "It is a fair distance to walk every day." The horse he offered was a gentle mare, dappled gray with kind eyes. Theresa ran her hand along the animal's neck, feeling the warmth of the creature beneath her palm. "She is beautiful. Her name is Silver," Thomas said. "She is patient and steady, good for someone who might not ride regularly." "I can ride," Theresa said, a touch of defensiveness in her voice. "I grew up around horses." Thomas raised his hands in mock surrender, that same transformative smile crossing his face. "I meant no offense. Shall we?" They rode together across the drought-stricken landscape, and Theresa was struck by the stark contrast as they crossed onto Thomas's property. While the drought had certainly affected his land, it was clear that careful water management had made an enormous difference. His cattle looked healthy. His grass, while not abundant, was sufficient to sustain them. The ranch house itself was larger than Theresa had expected, a sturdy two-story structure built from good timber, with a wide porch and several outbuildings. Everything was well maintained but had a distinctly masculine, utilitarian feel. There were no curtains in the windows, no flowers planted near the house, none of the small touches that made a house a home. "I know it is not much to look at," Thomas said, sounding almost apologetic. "I have focused more on the practical aspects than decoration." "It has good bones," Theresa said diplomatically. "It just needs a woman's touch." The words hung in the air between them, carrying an unintended intimacy. Theresa felt her cheeks warm. "I mean for the household operations we discussed, organization and such." "Of course," Thomas said quickly, though she thought she detected a hint of color in his own face. "Let me show you around." He led her through the property, pointing out the barn where he kept his horses, the large chicken coop that currently stood empty, the area he had set aside for a vegetable garden but had never developed. His knowledge of cattle and ranching was evident, but when it came to the domestic operations, he was clearly at a loss. "I have been buying eggs and vegetables in town when I can get them," he admitted. "But it seems foolish when I have the space and resources to produce them myself. I just never learned how." "Well, that is something I do know," Theresa said, feeling more confident now that they were discussing her areas of expertise. "We should start with chickens. They are relatively easy to manage and provide both eggs and meat. Then we can work on the garden. Even this late in the season, there are crops we can plant for fall harvest." They spent the morning planning, and Theresa found herself energized by the work in a way she had not felt in years. Thomas listened to her ideas with genuine interest, asking intelligent questions and offering practical solutions to logistical challenges. He treated her as an equal partner, valuing her expertise and experience. Around midday, they took a break in the shade of the porch. Thomas produced a canteen and some bread and cheese, simple fare but welcome after the morning's work. They sat side by side on the porch steps, their shoulders not quite touching but close enough that Theresa was acutely aware of his presence. "I have been thinking about the wage we discussed," Thomas said, pulling out a small notebook where he had been making calculations. "Based on the work you will be doing and the value it adds to the ranch, I think $15 a month is fair. Plus a percentage of profits from the eggs, produce, and any other goods you manage. Does that seem reasonable?" Theresa's breath caught. $15 a month was more than she had dared hope for. In 4 months, she could have enough to satisfy the bank, possibly with some left over. "Thomas, that is more than generous. I would have accepted half that amount." "The laborer is worthy of her hire," Thomas said firmly. "You are bringing skills and knowledge I lack. That has value. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "I am also getting cooking lessons, remember." That alone is worth a small fortune given how terrible my current diet is." Theresa laughed, the sound surprising her with its genuine pleasure. "I suppose I should get started on that as well. Your kitchen probably needs organizing." "Be gentle with me," Thomas said in mock fear. "I have no idea what half the things in there are actually for." Working in Thomas's kitchen was an education. He had clearly purchased equipment without understanding its purpose, resulting in a strange collection of cooking implements, some useful, many redundant. Theresa spent the afternoon organizing, cleaning, and beginning to prepare a proper meal. Thomas worked nearby, repairing a section of fence that needed attention, but he came back to the house regularly, drawn by the smells emanating from the kitchen. Theresa found herself hyper-aware of his presence, the way he moved through the space, the sound of his boots on the wooden floors, the deep timbre of his voice when he spoke. "That smells incredible," he said, appearing in the doorway as she pulled a pan of biscuits from the oven. "What is it?" "Just simple chicken stew," Theresa said, though she had taken extra care with the seasonings, wanting to impress him for reasons she did not want to examine too closely. "Nothing fancy." "If this is simple, I cannot imagine what fancy would be like," Thomas said, watching as she ladled the stew into bowls. "You are going to spoil me, Theresa." There it was again, that warmth in his voice when he said her name. Theresa kept her eyes on the food, not trusting herself to meet his gaze. This was supposed to be business, she reminded herself. A practical arrangement between neighbors, nothing more. But as they sat down to eat together for the second time, the conversation flowing easily between them, Theresa could not deny that something was developing between them. Something that felt dangerous and thrilling and terrifying all at once. Over the following weeks, they fell into a routine that felt both natural and charged with unspoken tension. Theresa would ride to Thomas's ranch each morning, spending her days working on the various projects they had planned. She purchased chickens in town, using an advance Thomas had given her, and set up the coop with efficient organization. Within days, they had their first eggs, and Thomas's delight at this simple accomplishment was endearing. The garden proved more challenging given the drought, but with careful irrigation from Thomas's well and Theresa's knowledge of which crops could tolerate the harsh conditions, they began to see results. Squash and beans pushed through the soil, their green leaves a defiant contrast to the brown landscape beyond the irrigated area. Theresa also began to transform the house itself. She could not help it. The disorder and lack of comfort offended her sense of order. She made curtains from fabric Thomas purchased in town, organized his chaotic collection of supplies, and added small touches that made the space more livable. Thomas watched these changes with barely concealed pleasure. "It is starting to feel like a home," he said one evening as they sat on the porch after supper, watching the sun set in a blaze of orange and red. "I did not realize how much I had been living in just a structure rather than a home." "Everyone needs a place that feels welcoming to come back to," Theresa said softly, "especially after a hard day's work." "Is that what this is for you?" Thomas asked, turning to look at her. A hard day's work. Theresa considered the question carefully. The work was certainly demanding, physically exhausting some days, but it was also deeply satisfying in a way her lonely struggle on her own failing farm had never been. "No," she admitted. "It feels like building something, creating rather than just surviving." "I feel the same way," Thomas said quietly. His hand rested on the porch railing, close enough to hers that she could feel the warmth of his skin without actually touching. "Having you here, working together like this, it has made me realize how isolated I have been. How much I was missing without even knowing it." The air between them felt charged, heavy with words unspoken. Theresa knew she should pull back, should maintain the professional distance that propriety demanded. But she found herself leaning slightly closer instead, drawn by a force she could not name or resist. "Thomas," she began, not sure what she intended to say. The sound of approaching hoofbeats shattered the moment. They both turned to see a rider approaching in the fading light. As the figure drew closer, Theresa recognized Samuel Porter, one of the ranch hands who worked for the largest operation in the county. "Evening, Thomas," Samuel called out, tipping his hat to Theresa. "Madam, sorry to interrupt, but we have got a situation down by the South Creek. Some of your cattle got mixed up with ours, and there is a fence down. Could use your help sorting it out before full dark." Thomas stood immediately, his sense of responsibility overriding everything else. "Of course. Let me saddle up." He turned to Theresa. "I am sorry, I need to handle this." "Go," Theresa said, standing as well. "I should be heading back to my place anyway. It is getting late." "Let me ride you home first," Thomas insisted. "That will take too long, and you are needed now," Theresa pointed out. "I know the way, and Silver is sure-footed even in low light." "Go take care of your cattle." Thomas hesitated, clearly torn. "Are you certain?" "Absolutely. Go." She watched him ride off with Samuel, then made her own way back to her property as darkness fell. The ride gave her time to think about what had almost happened on that porch, about the growing feelings she could no longer deny. She was falling for Thomas Whitmore, and the realization both thrilled and terrified her. Her marriage to Robert had been comfortable, built on mutual respect and shared goals, but it had lacked passion. What she felt stirring in her heart when she looked at Thomas was entirely different. It was intense and consuming, making her feel alive in a way she had never experienced before. But it was also dangerous. She was still a widow in mourning by society's standards, even though 2 years had passed. Thomas was an unmarried man with a reputation to protect. Their business arrangement already pushed the boundaries of propriety. Anything more would invite scandal, could ruin both their reputations, and possibly destroy the partnership that was saving her farm. Theresa spent a restless night wrestling with these thoughts, finally falling into an uneasy sleep as dawn approached. She woke late, disoriented and troubled, and had to rush through her morning routine to be ready when she expected Thomas to arrive. But he did not come. She waited on her porch, watching the road from his ranch, but the morning passed with no sign of him. By midday, worry had begun to gnaw at her. Had something happened during the cattle situation? Had he decided their growing closeness was inappropriate, and was now regretting the entire arrangement? Finally, unable to bear the uncertainty, Theresa saddled Silver and rode to Thomas's ranch herself. She found him in the barn, doctoring a horse that had apparently been injured during the previous night's fence repair. His face was drawn with exhaustion, his clothes rumpled as though he had not slept. "Thomas," she said, dismounting quickly. "What happened? Are you all right?" He looked up, surprise and relief crossing his features. "Theresa, I was going to ride over to explain, but this situation needed immediate attention." He gestured to the horse, whose leg was carefully bandaged. "We got the fence fixed and the cattle sorted, but my horse caught his leg in some wire in the dark. I have been up all night with him, making sure the wound was clean and the bleeding stopped." "Is he going to be all right?" Theresa asked, moving closer to examine the injury. "I think so," Thomas said wearily. "But it was a near thing. I am sorry I did not get word to you. I should have sent someone." "Do not be ridiculous," Theresa said firmly. "Your horse needed you. I just worried when you did not come." She paused, realizing what she had revealed with those words. "I mean, I wondered if something was wrong." Thomas straightened, his tired eyes focusing on her face with sudden intensity. "You were worried about me." "Of course I was," Theresa said, unable to keep the emotion from her voice. "Thomas, we are friends, are we not? Friends worry about each other." "Friends," Thomas repeated, the words sounding oddly flat. He was silent for a moment, then said quietly, "Is that what we are, Theresa? Friends?" The question hung between them, loaded with possibility and danger. Theresa's heart hammered in her chest. This was the moment where she should retreat, should reaffirm the boundaries of their professional relationship. But looking at his exhausted face, at the hope and uncertainty in his eyes, she found she could not lie. "I do not know," she whispered. "I know what we should be. What propriety demands we remain. But Thomas, what I feel when I am with you, it is not just friendship." He moved toward her, closing the distance between them in 2 long strides. "Thank God," he said fervently. "Theresa, I have been trying so hard to keep this professional, to respect your position as a widow, to not overstep. But every day I spend with you, I find it harder to pretend I do not feel more than I should." "We should not," Theresa said, even as her body swayed toward his. "People will talk. It could ruin your reputation, my reputation. We have only known each other a few weeks." "I do not care what people say," Thomas said intensely. "And I feel like I have known you forever. Like I was waiting my whole life without knowing what I was waiting for, and then you were there." He reached out, his hand cupping her cheek with infinite gentleness. "Tell me you feel it too. Tell me I am not alone in this." "You are not alone," Theresa breathed, leaning into his touch. "Thomas, I feel it too. I am falling in love with you, and I do not know how to stop it, and I am not sure I want to." "Then do not stop," he said, and kissed her. It was nothing like the chaste kisses she had shared with Robert. This was fire and passion and desperate need all rolled into one overwhelming sensation. Thomas kissed her like she was oxygen and he had been drowning, like she was the answer to a question he had been asking his entire life. Theresa kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said simply. "I know it is too soon, I know we should wait, but I cannot keep it inside anymore. I love you, Theresa." "I love you too," she replied, tears streaming down her face. "Thomas, I love you so much it terrifies me." He kissed her again, softer this time, tender and reverent. "Then we will figure it out together," he promised. "Whatever challenges we face, whatever people say, we will handle it together. That is, if you want to, if you are willing to risk it." "I am willing," Theresa said, knowing she was committing to far more than a simple romance. She was choosing to open her heart again, to trust in love after loss, to believe that happiness was possible even in the harsh reality of drought-stricken Texas. "I am willing to risk everything for this. For you." They held each other in the barn, surrounded by the smell of hay and horses, and made promises in whispered voices. They would be discreet, would give the town no cause for excessive gossip. They would continue their business arrangement as planned, proving to everyone that their partnership was legitimate and profitable. But in private, they would allow themselves to explore this new connection, to build a foundation for a future together. Over the following weeks, their relationship deepened in both public and private spheres. To the outside world, they maintained the appearance of business partners and neighbors helping each other through hard times. Theresa continued to work on Thomas's ranch, and the results of her efforts were visible for all to see. The chicken coop produced more eggs than Thomas could use himself, so he began selling the surplus in town. The garden yielded vegetables that Theresa preserved with expert skill, filling Thomas's root cellar with jars of tomatoes, beans, and pickles. In early September, Theresa approached Thomas with an idea. We have more produce than we can use or preserve, she said, surveying the abundant garden with satisfaction. What if we sold some at the market in El Dorado? There are people in town struggling just as we have been. Fresh vegetables would sell well. Thomas considered this. It is a good idea. You have a better sense of what to price them at. Would you be willing to manage that side of things? And so Theresa found herself at the market every Saturday, selling their goods and interacting with the townspeople. The arrangement drew some curiosity, but the quality of their products and Theresa's fair prices won over most skeptics. She became known as an excellent source for eggs and vegetables, and the income from these sales added steadily to her savings. By mid-September, Theresa counted her money carefully and realized with shock that she had enough to pay the bank. Between the wages Thomas had paid her and her share of the market sales, she had accumulated $320. She could save her farm. She rode to Thomas's ranch that evening, her heart full of conflicting emotions. She found him working in the barn, repairing a saddle by lamplight. He looked up as she entered, and the smile that crossed his face at the sight of her made her heart skip. "I did not expect you this evening," he said, setting aside his work and standing. "Not that I am complaining, I always want to see you." "Thomas, I have news," Theresa said, moving into his arms when he opened them to her. They had become physically comfortable with each other over the weeks, though they had maintained strict boundaries, knowing that propriety demanded they wait for marriage before taking things further. "I have the money. I can pay the bank." She expected him to be pleased, but instead he looked troubled. "That is wonderful news," he said slowly. "You must be relieved." "I am," Theresa said, studying his face. "But you do not look happy." "What is wrong?" Thomas sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I am happy for you, truly." "But Theresa, I have to ask, what happens now? Once you pay the bank, once your farm is secure, will you still want to work here? Will you still need me?" Theresa pulled back, stunned. "Thomas Whitmore, do you honestly think my feelings for you are based on need, that I am here because of business?" "No, Thomas struggled with the words. "I know you value your independence. Your farm means everything to you. I do not want you to feel obligated to continue our arrangement if you would rather focus on your own land." "My farm is a piece of property," Theresa said fiercely. "It represents security and the memory of my late husband, and yes, it is important to me. But Thomas, you are important to me too. What we have built together here, it is not just about money or water or business arrangements. I love working with you. I love being with you. I love you." The tension drained from Thomas's face. "I love you too. I am sorry, I just got into my own head. Started thinking about how much I have come to depend on you being here, how empty this place would feel without you." "Then ask me to stay," Theresa challenged. "Not as an employee, not as a business partner. Ask me to stay for the right reasons." Thomas took both her hands in his blue eyes serious and full of emotion. "Theresa Fairchild, I am asking you to marry me. I know we have not been courting long by society's standards, but I know my own heart. You are the woman I want to spend my life with. I want to wake up next to you every morning, build a future together, maybe raise children if we are blessed that way. I want to legally join our properties, combine our lives in every way possible. I am asking you to be my wife." Theresa felt tears streaming down her face again. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, Thomas, I will marry you." He swept her into his arms, spinning her around in a circle before setting her down and kissing her thoroughly. When they finally came up for air, both were laughing and crying at once. "We should tell people," Thomas said practically, though he made no move to release her from his embrace. "Do this properly. I will speak to the Reverend in El Dorado, arrange for the banns to be posted. We can marry in a few weeks." "A few weeks," Theresa said, raising an eyebrow. "That is very fast." "I have waited long enough for happiness," Thomas said firmly. "I do not want to wait any longer than necessary, unless you want a long engagement." "No," Theresa admitted. "I want to be your wife, Thomas. The sooner the better." They decided to announce their engagement after Theresa had paid the bank, wanting to keep the two events separate to avoid any suggestion that their relationship was based on financial considerations. The following Monday, Theresa walked into the El Dorado Bank and Trust with her head held high, depositing enough to satisfy the loan with a small amount left over. Mr. Henderson, the bank manager, looked surprised to see the payment in full. "Mrs. Fairchild, I must admit, I did not think this was possible. How did you manage it?" "Hard work and a good business partnership," Theresa said calmly. "I have been working with my neighbor, Thomas Whitmore, helping him develop his ranch operations. The income was sufficient to save my farm." Henderson nodded slowly, making notes in his ledger. "Well, congratulations. Your property is secure, though I must say you might want to consider selling anyway. This drought does not look likely to break anytime soon." "I will keep that in mind," Theresa said non-committally. In truth, she and Thomas had already discussed the future of her property. The plan was to use it primarily for grazing, combining it with Thomas's ranch into one larger, more efficient operation. But that was their business, not Mr. Henderson's. The announcement of their engagement, when it came the following Sunday after church services, caused exactly the stir Theresa had expected. Some people were genuinely happy for them, understanding that two people working closely together might naturally develop feelings. Others were scandalized that the widow had moved on so quickly, that an unmarried man and woman had been spending so much time alone together, that the whole arrangement was improper. Theresa held her head high through the whispers and gossip, Thomas's steady presence at her side giving her strength. They had done nothing wrong, conducted their courtship with as much propriety as their circumstances allowed. If some people chose to think poorly of them, that was their burden to carry, not Theresa and Thomas's. The wedding was planned for the first Saturday in October, a small ceremony at the church in El Dorado with a simple reception to follow. Theresa had no family left, her parents having passed years before, but several of the women she had befriended through her market stall offered to help with preparations. Thomas likewise had no family, so the guest list was composed primarily of neighbors and business acquaintances. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, Theresa divided her time between her own property and Thomas's ranch, beginning the process of moving her belongings and making plans for their combined future. Thomas surprised her by asking what changes she wanted to make to his house, their house now. "I want it to be your home too," he said seriously. "Not just a place you moved into but did not shape. What would make you happy?" They spent an evening walking through the rooms, Theresa pointing out where she would like to make changes. A proper kitchen garden near the back door, herbs for cooking and medicine, curtains in warmer colors for the bedroom, making it feel more intimate and welcoming. Perhaps a sitting room with comfortable chairs where they could spend evenings together, reading or talking. "I want to build you a workshop," Thomas said suddenly. "A place where you can do your preserving and food preparation on a larger scale. If we are going to continue selling at the market, and I think we should, you will need proper space for that work." "Thomas, that is a wonderful idea," Theresa said, touched by his thoughtfulness. "But it is not necessary." "I want to do it," he insisted. "You are bringing so much to this marriage, to this ranch. I want to give you something that is yours, a space where you can work and create." The night before the wedding, Theresa stayed at her own property one last time, observing the tradition that the bride and groom should not see each other before the ceremony. She walked through the small house that had been her home for years, remembering both the happy times with Robert and the desperate struggles after his death. She felt a moment of guilt, wondering if she was betraying Robert's memory by loving Thomas so completely. But then she remembered something Robert had said to her once, during a rare moment of openness. They had been discussing the death of a neighbor, and Robert had said, "If something ever happens to me, Theresa, promise me you will not spend your whole life alone. Find happiness again if you can." She had dismissed it at the time, unable to imagine life without him. But now, standing in their house with her new life about to begin, she sent a silent thank you to Robert's memory. He had been a good man, and she would always honor what they had shared. But her heart belonged to Thomas now, and she was ready to embrace the future without guilt or reservation. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the October sky a brilliant blue unmarred by clouds. Theresa dressed in a simple but elegant dress she had made herself, pale green cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. She left her auburn hair mostly down, pulled back from her face with combs, the way Thomas had mentioned he liked it. She rode to the church alone, savoring these last moments of solitude before her life changed forever. When she arrived, she found Thomas already there, pacing nervously outside. He wore his best clothes, a dark suit that was likely new, his hair neatly trimmed and his face freshly shaved. When he saw her, he stopped mid-stride, his expression transforming into something that made Theresa's breath catch. "You are beautiful," he said simply. "The most beautiful thing I have ever seen." The ceremony itself was brief, the words traditional and familiar. But when Thomas slipped a simple gold band onto Theresa's finger and spoke his vows, his voice was thick with emotion. When she promised to love and honor him all the days of her life, she meant every word with an intensity that surprised her. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the Reverend said, and Thomas kissed her in front of God and the assembled witnesses, a kiss that was both proper for the occasion and full of promise for their private future. The reception was held at the town hall, a modest affair with simple food and no alcohol, befitting a small community celebration. But there was music, a local man with a fiddle playing lively tunes, and dancing. Thomas proved to be a surprisingly good dancer, guiding Theresa through the steps with confidence. "Where did you learn to dance like this?" she asked, laughing as he spun her. "My mother taught me," he said, his eyes warm with memory. "She said any civilized man should know how to dance." I think she hoped I would eventually find someone worth dancing with. "I am glad you did," Theresa said softly. As the afternoon wore on and the celebration began to wind down, Thomas leaned close and whispered, "Are you ready to go home, Mrs. Whitmore?" The name sent a thrill through her. "Yes, Mr. Whitmore, I am ready." They rode back to the ranch together in the wagon Thomas had driven to town, Theresa's belongings loaded in the back along with gifts from well-wishers. The sun was setting as they arrived, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. Thomas pulled the wagon to a stop in front of their house, and turned to his new bride. "I know this is not the grandest place," he said. "Not what every woman dreams of, but I promise you, Theresa, I will spend every day of my life trying to make you happy here." "Thomas," Theresa said, taking his face in her hands, "this is exactly what I dream of. A home built on honest work and real love. A partner who respects me and values what I bring to our marriage. The chance to build something lasting together. I do not need grand. I just need you." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, no longer constrained by the need for propriety. She was his wife now, and the desire they had carefully controlled for weeks could finally be expressed. They stumbled into the house, unable to keep their hands off each other, laughing and kissing and working at buttons and laces with eager but clumsy fingers. Their wedding night was everything Theresa had hoped for, and nothing like her experience with Robert. Thomas was passionate but tender, taking his time to learn what pleased her, making sure her pleasure matched his own. They made love with a desperate intensity born of weeks of restraint, then again more slowly, savoring each sensation and discovery. Afterward they lay tangled together in the bed, Theresa's head on Thomas's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," she murmured sleepily. "I never knew it could be like this." "Like what?" Thomas asked, his hand stroking lazily through her hair. "So complete," Theresa said, trying to find the words. "With Robert it was comfortable but never passionate. I thought that was just how marriage was. But with you, it is everything all at once. Passion and comfort and friendship and desire. I feel whole in a way I never have before." Thomas tightened his arms around her. "I feel the same way, like I was incomplete my whole life and did not know it until I found you. You are my other half, Theresa, my partner in everything." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, the future bright with possibility. The early months of their marriage were a period of adjustment and joy. They settled into rhythms of life and work that complemented each other beautifully. Thomas continued managing the cattle operation while Theresa expanded the household production side of the ranch. The workshop Thomas had promised became a reality. A well-designed building where Theresa could work on large-scale food preservation and preparation. The market stall in El Dorado became increasingly popular as word spread about the quality of their goods. Theresa's preserves, eggs, and when available, fresh vegetables sold quickly. She also began selling baked goods, her skills as a baker proving as valuable as her other talents. The income from these sales was not enormous, but it was steady and reliable, adding to their financial security. In November, a rainstorm finally broke the drought. It was not enough to fully replenish the parched land, but it was a start. The creek that ran through both properties began flowing more steadily. Their combined land showed signs of recovery, grass beginning to grow in areas that had been bare dirt for months. "We are going to make it," Thomas said one evening as they watched the rain fall from their porch. "This ranch, our life together, all of it, we are going to build something that lasts." "We already have," Theresa said, taking his hand. "We have each other. Everything else is just details." In December, Theresa began to suspect she might be pregnant. She kept the news to herself at first, wanting to be certain before raising Thomas's hopes. But by January, there was no doubt. She was carrying their child. She told Thomas on a cold winter evening when they were sitting by the fire after supper. "I have news," she said, trying to keep her voice calm despite her excitement and nervousness. "We are going to have a baby." Thomas's face went through a series of expressions: shock, joy, fear, wonder, all in rapid succession. "A baby, truly, truly," Theresa confirmed. "Sometime in late summer, I think." He pulled her into his arms, holding her with a gentleness that brought tears to her eyes. "We are going to be parents," he said, wonder in his voice. "Theresa, you have made me the happiest man alive." "Are you frightened?" she asked, thinking of his own experience losing his family. "Terrified," he admitted, "but also more excited than I have words for. We are going to do this together, and our child is going to have a good life, a safe home, parents who love each other. That is all I ever wanted." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter and spring. Theresa continued working as long as she felt able, only reluctantly scaling back her activities as her belly grew. Thomas became almost comically protective, worried about her doing anything too strenuous. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," Theresa protested when he tried to prevent her from hanging laundry. Women have been having babies and working through it for all of human history. Not my wife and not my baby, Thomas said stubbornly. Let me take care of you, please. His concern was touching even when it was excessive, and Theresa found herself giving in more often than not. She focused on lighter tasks, preparing the house for a baby, sewing tiny clothes and organizing a nursery in one of the spare bedrooms. In August, as the summer heat peaked, Theresa went into labor. The local midwife, Mrs. Patterson, attended her through a long day and into the night. Thomas paced outside the bedroom door, nearly wild with worry every time Theresa cried out. Finally, as the sun rose on a new day, the sound of a baby's cry filled the house. Mrs. Patterson opened the door with a tired smile. "You have a son, Mr. Whitmore, a healthy, strong boy, and your wife did beautifully." Thomas rushed into the room, his eyes going immediately to Theresa, who lay exhausted but radiant in the bed, holding a tiny bundle. "Are you all right?" he asked urgently, kneeling beside her. "I am perfect," Theresa said softly. "Thomas, meet your son." She pulled back the blanket so he could see the baby's face, red and scrunched but undeniably perfect. Thomas reached out with a trembling hand to touch the tiny head covered in dark fuzz. "He is so small," he whispered in awe. "He is perfect," Theresa said, "just like his father." They named him Robert Thomas Whitmore, honoring both Theresa's late husband and the baby's father. Thomas held his son with infinite care, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he cradled the infant. "I promise you," Thomas said to the baby, his voice thick with emotion, "I will always protect you. I will teach you to be a good man, to work hard, to treat people with respect, and I will make sure you always know how much you are loved." Theresa watched her husband with their son, her heart so full she thought it might burst. This was everything she had never dared dream of. A husband who loved her completely, a healthy child, a home built on partnership and mutual respect, security after years of struggle. The first years of Robert's life were demanding, but joyful. Thomas proved to be a devoted father, involved in his son's care in a way that was unusual for the time but perfectly natural for him. He would walk the floor with the baby when he was fussy, change diapers without complaint, and sing lullabies in his deep voice that never failed to soothe the child. The ranch continued to thrive. The drought had broken fully by the time Robert was born, and the land recovered with surprising speed. Their combined property, managed with intelligence and care, became one of the more successful operations in the county. The cattle herd grew. The market stall remained profitable. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable and secure. When Robert was 2 years old, Theresa discovered she was pregnant again. This time the news was less of a surprise, but no less welcome. Their daughter was born in the spring of 1887, a tiny girl with her mother's auburn hair and her father's blue eyes. They named her Sarah Elizabeth, and Thomas was just as smitten with his daughter as he had been with his son. "We have been blessed beyond measure," Thomas said one evening when both children were finally asleep. He and Theresa sat on the porch they had shared so many evenings, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Sometimes I think about that day I rode over to your property to offer you water. What if I had not done it? What if I had kept to myself like I usually did?" "But you did not," Theresa said, leaning against his shoulder. "You reached out when I needed help. You gave me not just water but hope, a future, a family, everything." "You gave me just as much," Thomas insisted. "More, maybe. You taught me that taking a risk on love was worth it, that opening my heart after loss was not weakness but courage." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Theresa said, "Do you remember what you said to me the day you proposed?" that you wanted to build a future together, raise children, legally join our lives in every way. I remember every word I said to you that day, Thomas confirmed. We have done it, Theresa said softly. We have built exactly the life you described. And Thomas, it is better than I ever imagined it could be. He kissed her then, tender and sweet, a kiss that held all the love and commitment of their years together. I love you, Theresa Whitmore. I will love you until the day I die and beyond. And I love you, she replied. My cowboy who shared his water and his life, the best man I have ever known. The years continued to pass, marked by the steady rhythms of ranch life and family. Robert grew into a sturdy boy who followed his father everywhere, eager to learn the work of cattle and land management. Sarah was bright and curious, with her mother's talent for growing things and her father's determination. In 1890, Theresa gave birth to their third child, another son they named William. The house that had once seemed too large for just Thomas now rang with the sounds of children's laughter and the organized chaos of family life. The ranch continued to expand and prosper. Thomas and Theresa had become known throughout the county as fair employers and skilled ranchers. They hired several permanent hands to help with the growing operation, treating them well and earning their loyalty in return. Theresa maintained her market stall in El Dorado, though as the children grew, she brought them with her to town, teaching them the value of honest work and fair dealing. She became a fixture in the community, known for her quality goods and warm personality. The whispers and gossip that had surrounded her marriage to Thomas had long since faded, replaced by respect and affection. Thomas involved himself in local governance, serving on the county council and advocating for better water management practices that could help prevent future droughts. His experience drilling the well that had saved both his ranch and Theresa's farm made him an expert on the subject, and his practical solutions helped many of their neighbors improve their own properties. By 1895, Robert was 10 years old and already a capable ranch hand in his own right. Sarah, at 8, was showing signs of becoming an excellent horsewoman. William, at 5, was the most social of their children, making friends with everyone he met and showing an early talent for negotiation that made his parents laugh. One evening in the summer of that year, after the children were in bed, Thomas and Theresa took their usual place on the porch. Thomas had grown a bit more weathered over the years, gray threading through his dark hair, lines deepening around his eyes. But to Theresa, he was as handsome as the day she had married him, perhaps more so for the life they had built together. I have been thinking, Thomas said, taking Theresa's hand in his, about how far we have come since that first day I rode over to your property. Do you realize it has been 12 years since we met? 12 years, Theresa repeated, marveling at how quickly time had passed. It feels like yesterday in some ways, in others like we have always been together. I want to do something to mark the occasion, Thomas said, something meaningful. What did you have in mind? Theresa asked. Thomas pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. I have been working on this for a while now. I want to officially deed half of the ranch to you, not as my wife but as my full partner in every legal sense. Everything we have built, we built together. The title should reflect that. Theresa felt tears prick her eyes. In a time when women had few property rights, Thomas's gesture was both legally significant and deeply personal. Thomas, you do not have to do that. I know I do not have to, he said firmly. I want to. Theresa, you are not just my wife. You are my partner, my best friend, my equal in every way that matters. This ranch exists because of your skills and hard work as much as mine. It should be legally yours too. Then yes, Theresa said, kissing him softly. Thank you for this, for everything. for being the kind of man who sees me as an equal partner, not just a helpmate. How could I see you as anything less? Thomas asked genuinely. You saved me as much as I saved you, Theresa. We rescued each other from loneliness and struggle. We built this life together, brick by brick, season by season. I could not have done any of it without you. They sat together as the stars emerged, talking about their children's futures, about plans for the ranch, about the life they were still building together. The drought that had brought them together seemed like a distant memory now, though its lessons remained. They knew the value of water, of preparation, of helping neighbors in need. They taught those values to their children, hoping to raise a generation that would be better stewards of the land. In 1897, tragedy struck the community when a fire swept through El Dorado, destroying several buildings including the church where Thomas and Theresa had married. The town rallied to rebuild, and Thomas and Theresa were among the most generous contributors, both in money and in labor. They worked alongside their neighbors, their children helping where they could, demonstrating the community values that were central to their family. When the new church was completed, the reverend who had married them, now elderly but still serving the community, held a special service of rededication. He asked couples who had been married in the original church to stand and renew their vows as a symbol of continuity and faith. Thomas and Theresa stood together. Their children gathered around them and spoke the familiar words with the same conviction they had felt 14 years earlier. But now, those vows had been tested by time and proven true. They had weathered challenges together, raised children, built a successful life, and through it all, their love had only deepened. I love you more today than I did the day we married, Thomas whispered to Theresa as they sat back down. I did not think that was possible, but it is true. I know, Theresa whispered back. I feel the same way. Loving you has been the great adventure of my life. The turn of the century brought changes to Texas and to the American West in general. The wild frontier was becoming more settled, more civilized. Railroads connected communities that had once been isolated. New technologies were changing the way ranches operated. But for Thomas and Theresa, the fundamental rhythms of their life remained constant. The changing seasons, the work of managing land and livestock, the joy of watching their children grow. Robert, at 15, was talking about studying agriculture at the state college, wanting to bring new scientific methods back to the ranch. Sarah, at 13, had discovered a talent for training horses and was becoming known for her skill. William, at 10, showed signs of following his father's path into community leadership, always organizing the neighborhood children into elaborate games and projects. In 1902, Theresa discovered she was pregnant again, a surprise given that she was now 45 years old and had assumed her childbearing years were behind her. The pregnancy was harder than her previous ones, and both she and Thomas worried about the risks. But in the spring of 1903, she safely delivered a healthy baby girl they named Grace, a name that reflected their gratitude for this unexpected blessing. Grace's arrival seemed to complete their family in a way none of them had anticipated. The older children doted on their baby sister, and Thomas was impossibly tender with this late addition to their family. Theresa, holding her newborn daughter, marveled at how life continued to surprise her with gifts she had not known to hope for. 4 children, she said to Thomas one evening as they watched Grace sleep. A thriving ranch, a community that has become our extended family, and you. All of this started because you chose kindness over indifference. I chose to share water, Thomas corrected gently. But I got so much more in return. I got you. I got this family. I got a life that has meaning and purpose. That was never an even trade, Theresa. I got the better end of the bargain by far." "We both won," Theresa insisted. "That is the beauty of what we built. It was never about one of us sacrificing for the other. We lifted each other up. We made each other better." As Grace grew, the ranch adapted to accommodate an active toddler once again. The older children took turns watching their baby sister, teaching her to walk and talk, including her in their activities as much as her age allowed. The house that had once seemed too large now felt perfectly sized for their bustling family. By 1910, Robert had indeed gone to college and returned with a degree in agricultural science, bringing new ideas about crop rotation, soil management, and water conservation. He worked alongside his father to implement these innovations, and the ranch benefited enormously. Sarah had married a neighboring rancher's son, a good man who respected her skills with horses. They lived close enough to visit regularly, and Sarah remained actively involved in the family operation. William, at 20, was serving on the county council like his father before him, already making a name for himself as a thoughtful leader and effective advocate. And Grace, at 7, was the delight of the entire family, bright and cheerful with her mother's green eyes and her father's determination. Thomas and Theresa, now in their 50s, had aged together gracefully. Thomas's hair was fully gray now, his face deeply lined from years in the sun, but he was still strong and capable. Theresa's auburn hair had faded and whitened, her hands permanently marked by decades of work, but her eyes still sparkled with the same intelligence and warmth that had first attracted Thomas. They still took their evening walks together, still sat on the porch as the sun set, still talked for hours about everything and nothing. Their physical passion had mellowed but not disappeared, transforming into something deeper and more sustaining. They knew each other's rhythms and preferences, could communicate with a look or a touch, had built an intimacy that went beyond the physical. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in shades of gold and crimson, Thomas said, "Do you ever regret it? Choosing this life with me instead of keeping your independence?" Theresa looked at him in genuine surprise. "Thomas Whitmore, in nearly 30 years of marriage, you have never asked me such a foolish question. Why would you ask it now?" "I have been thinking about mortality lately," Thomas admitted. "We are not young anymore. I want to make sure you know that I understand what you gave up when you married me. Your own property, your autonomy, the freedom to make all your own choices." "I gave up nothing," Theresa said firmly. "I gained everything." "Thomas, yes, I could have remained independent, struggled alone, maintained my own small property. But what kind of life would that have been? Isolated, difficult, without this love we share, without our children and grandchildren, without the joy of building something meaningful together. You did not take my independence. You gave me partnership. You gave me equality within marriage, which is rarer and more valuable than independence outside of it." "I just want you to be happy," Thomas said quietly. "I am happy," Theresa assured him. "Deliriously, completely happy. Look at what we have created together. Not just this ranch, though I am proud of that. Not just our children, though they are wonderful, but this life, Thomas. This love that has sustained us through decades. How many people can say they found their true partner, their soulmate, their best friend in one person? We have been so blessed." Thomas pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "I love you, Theresa. That has never changed, never wavered, not for a single day in all these years." "I love you too," she replied. "My cowboy who shared his water and changed my life. The best decision I ever made was accepting your help. The second best was falling in love with you." The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own challenges and joys. They weathered economic downturns and droughts, celebrated weddings and births, mourned losses and setbacks. Through it all, Thomas and Theresa remained each other's constant support and comfort. In 1920, they celebrated their 37th wedding anniversary with a party thrown by their children. The ranch was filled with family and friends. 3 generations gathered to celebrate a love that had endured and thrived across decades. Robert gave a toast, his voice emotional as he spoke about the example his parents had set. "They taught us that marriage is partnership," he said, raising his glass. "That love is work but also joy. That respecting each other and building together creates something that lasts. Dad, Mom, thank you for showing us what a good marriage looks like. Everything good in my own life I owe to the foundation you gave me." Sarah spoke next, her words equally heartfelt. "People always say that children need to see their parents love each other. We had that in abundance. You never hid your affection, never let us doubt that your marriage was strong. You showed us that love does not fade with time. It grows deeper, more beautiful, more essential." William, always the politician, made everyone laugh with stories of his parents' legendary stubbornness when they disagreed about ranch business, but noted that they always found a way to compromise and move forward together. "They taught me that disagreement does not mean disrespect, and that 2 people who truly respect each other can always find common ground." Even Grace, now 17 and preparing to leave for teachers' college, spoke about how her parents' love had shaped her understanding of what she wanted in her own future. "I will never settle for less than what you 2 have," she said simply. "You set the standard impossibly high, and I am grateful for it." Thomas and Theresa, sitting together at the center of the celebration, held hands and absorbed the love of their family. Later, alone in their bedroom, they reflected on the day. "We did all right, did we not?" Thomas said, pulling Theresa into his arms. "We did better than all right," Theresa replied. "We built something beautiful, Thomas. A family, a legacy, a love story that will outlast us." "Are you tired?" Thomas asked, sensing something in her voice. "A little," Theresa admitted. She was 63 now, and while still active and engaged, she had begun to feel the weight of her years. But it is a good tired, the tired of a life well lived. They made love that night with the tender familiarity of decades together, and afterward lay wrapped in each other's arms. "Promise me something," Theresa said softly. "When my time comes, promise me you will remember the joy more than the grief. Remember our adventures, our love, the life we built. Do not let sorrow define what we had." "Theresa," Thomas began, his voice breaking. "Promise me," she insisted gently. "I need to know that our love will not become a weight for you to carry, but a light to guide you." "I promise," Thomas said, though the words hurt to speak. "But you are not going anywhere for a long time yet. We still have years ahead of us." And they did have years, several more of them. They watched Grace graduate from college and return to teach in El Dorado. They celebrated as Robert's scientific farming methods became standard practice throughout the county. They welcomed more grandchildren, the ranch now home to the 3rd generation of the family they had created. Theresa passed away peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1925, at the age of 68. She went to bed one night in Thomas's arms and simply did not wake up. Thomas, devastated but trying to honor her wishes, celebrated her life rather than wallowing in grief. At her funeral, he spoke about their love story, about how one act of neighborly kindness had blossomed into a lifetime of partnership and joy. "She saved my life as surely as I helped save her farm," he told the assembled mourners. "She taught me what love could be, what marriage should be, what family means. Every good thing in my life came from loving her and being loved by her in return. I am grateful for every day we had together. And I know she would want me to keep living fully, to keep loving our family, to honor her memory by finding joy in each day. And he did. Thomas lived another 8 years, active and involved with the ranch and his family until the very end. He told his children and grandchildren stories about their grandmother, keeping her memory vivid and alive. He would sit on the porch they had shared and talk to her, as though she were still there, finding comfort in the connection that death had not severed. When Thomas passed away in 1933 at the age of 78, it was in the same bed where Theresa had died, in the house they had made a home together. His last words were, "Theresa, I am coming home." They were buried side by side on a hillside overlooking the ranch, their graves marked by a simple stone that read, Thomas Whitmore and Theresa Fairchild Whitmore, partners in life, love, and legacy. 1855–1933 and 1857–1925. The ranch continued to thrive under Robert's management, then under his children and their children after that. But it was always known as the place where Thomas and Theresa built something extraordinary. Not just a successful cattle operation, but a family legacy rooted in love, respect, and partnership. In drought years, when water became scarce and neighbors struggled, the Whitmore Ranch always shared, honoring the tradition Thomas had started all those years ago when he rode to a desperate widow's property and offered his well water. That generosity, that understanding that we all rise or fall together, became part of the family's identity. The story of how Thomas and Theresa met and fell in love was told and retold through the generations, becoming part of family legend. How a widow lost her farm to drought. How a neighboring cowboy shared his water and his life. How that simple act of kindness blossomed into one of the great love stories of their community, a testament to the power of compassion, respect, and partnership. Their descendants would often visit the graves on the hillside, especially newlywed couples seeking inspiration for their own marriages. They would tell their children how great-great-grandma and great-great-grandpa had built something that lasted, not through wealth or privilege, but through hard work, mutual respect, and unwavering love. The house where they had lived, laughed, loved, and raised their children still stood well into the 21st century, lovingly preserved by the family. The porch where they had spent countless evenings remained a gathering place for family celebrations. The land they had worked and nurtured continued to produce, a testament to their good stewardship and vision. But more than the physical legacy, more than the property and prosperity, what Thomas and Theresa left behind was a model of what love could be. Not the easy romance of fairy tales, but the deep, sustaining love built through shared struggle and mutual respect. The kind of love that sees a partner in need and offers help without hesitation. The kind of love that grows stronger with time rather than fading. The kind of love that creates ripples across generations, shaping family culture and values long after the original lovers have passed. In the harsh landscape of 1880s Texas, two people found each other in the midst of drought and desperation. They chose to build together rather than struggle alone. They chose partnership over independence, love over safety, hope over resignation. And in doing so, they created something that transcended their individual lives, a legacy of love that proved that the best stories do not always have the easiest beginnings, but they can have the most beautiful endings. Their water well, the one Thomas had drilled that started everything, continued to flow for over a century, providing for the family and ranch. Some of the older family members swore it never ran dry, even in the worst drought years, as though blessed by the love story it had initiated. Whether literal truth or family mythology, the well became a symbol of the enduring nature of Thomas and Theresa's love, a spring that never ran dry, nourishing generation after generation. And so the story ends where all the best love stories do. Not with the first kiss or even the wedding, but with the knowledge that love, true love, builds something that outlasts mortality. Thomas and Theresa Whitmore shared water, shared work, shared a life, and shared a love that became legendary. They proved that in helping each other, we often find ourselves. That in opening our hearts to love, even after loss, we open ourselves to life's greatest blessings. That the best partnerships are built not on need or convenience, but on mutual respect, genuine affection, and the daily choice to build together rather than apart. Their story, begun in drought and desperation, ended in abundance and legacy. And every spring, when the Texas wildflowers bloomed on the hillside where they rested, the family would gather to remember the widow and the cowboy who shared water and built a love that never ran dry.